I'm Hannah. I'm postgraduate within the Centre for Rural Policy Research at University of Exeter. So I'm part of an animal feeding project. And if you're interested, you can scan the QR code there to find out more information. Yeah, of course. So the animal feeding project is about the causes and consequences of feeding non-human animals, especially when we don't need to. So originally it was aimed at trying to discover more about the emotional connections that humans have to non-human animals, and was therefore focused on wildlife, pets, zoo life, animals that we consider pests, and so on. However, social scientific literature has revealed that there are many affective or emotional aspects to livestock farming, which are about more than just production. And this is why I decided to focus on the feeding of livestock or farm animals. Also, you see the word regenerative, so that's because I'm focusing on regenerative farms. Regenerative agriculture aims to improve the land, benefit the environment, and increase biodiversity. And therefore, it's a useful lens for looking into the more effective practices and encounters. So also feeding practices are seen as important for achieving good farming. So in a way, it's a little bit strange that within the literature that uses the good farmer concept, feeding is not referred to at all. Therefore, my aim is to look into the practical and effective aspects of feeding, which have consequences for human-animal relations. So what are my aim and research questions? So the aim is to investigate the effective aspects of feeding practices, care, and the good farmer concept within regenerative farming systems. And then one of the questions is how regenerative farmers are both perceiving and performing good farming in Devon, England. So what do they think of good farming? What are they actually doing? And how are these perceptions and performances of good farming actually manifested in the feeding practices? Finally, I'm interested in how good farming for these regenerative farmers compares to the good farmer identity or habitus as outlined in the literature. So what is regenerative agriculture? So just to let you know, it's a very broad and contested term, and it does mean different things to different people. But overall, it's an approach to farming, a mindset, and also a social movement, which is gaining momentum in the UK. It's seen by proponents as a way of farming holistically or in balance with nature, in harmony with nature, in order to regenerate the land, basically improve the land that you've got, and even reverse previous degradation. And some people argue that there are 5 key principles of regenerative agriculture. So this image is from Groundswell. It's the largest festival and conference in the UK for regenerative agriculture. So John Cherry argues that the principles include minimizing tillage, planting cover crops, retaining living roots, growing a diversity of crops, and integrating livestock. So I'll just briefly go over my methods. So it involves 13 months of multi-sited, multi-species ethnography on 3 small to medium livestock farms in Devon, which basically act as my case studies. And they were between 40 acres and 500 acres. In case anybody is not aware, though you probably are, ethnography is basically a family of methods and involves immersing yourself within another culture. So for me, it involved participant observation, semi-structured, in-depth interviews, and visual methods in the form of photography, video, and photo elicitation. So all of the photographs you see in this paper are taken by myself or my interlocutors, so my participants, as a way of collecting data. So all the names of farms and participants are pseudonymized, and I've used role-based names for my interlocutors, so names like the shepherd and the gardener, just to give you an indication of what their role was on the farm, but also their personality and their hobbies outside of farming. And the reason for doing the field work over the course of 13 months is because I wanted to observe the farms through the 4 seasons, and I'm interested in how the seasonality is shaping the feeding in material, practical, and effective ways. So one finding is that human-animal relations can include affective attachments. But I already knew this because Wilkie wrote in 2005, livestock farming involves both emotional attachment and emotional detachment. And she explains that some farm animals can deviate from the norm and become classified as a pet because of their distinctive personalities. However, she does argue that livestock and pets are not opposing categories. They're both transient and they can become blurred in some instances. So the gardener, one of my interlocutors, she had 2 pet cattle, a cow and a steer named Belita and Terence, which are actually named after her father and her aunt. So here you see Belita and Terence. And this is just an extract from a conversation I had with the gardener. So in this conversation, she's explaining how she became attached to her pet cattle, a cow and a steer, because she named them, they were small herd, and also she cared for them daily. Therefore, they basically became pets. But she also explains that they were therapy animals and helped her to get through hard times. However, she does find this a dilemma because she does not want to kill them now that she is attached to them. So a bit of a sad story to this one. I heard recently that Terence was recently moved on, which is a euphemism for slaughtered. And the reason was that he wasn't exercising enough, so he was gaining a lot of weight. And also he was still suckling from Belita, therefore she was getting skinnier. And so it wasn't really a good situation for anyone. And there was pressure on this farmer from other farmers on the same farm to basically have him taken to the abattoir. So that's what happened there, and it just goes to show that the categories are transient. But another example of the affective attachments would be the traveller's connection to and love for a cow. So here the traveller explains and talks about his experience of helping a cow to calve. So basically she had a breech birth, which means the calf is in the wrong position, and he helped her to give birth. He describes how he was really amazed by her calmness. He can milk her without her getting up, and he even says a connection has happened here. So when I asked if the love was two-way or not, because previously he was talking about love of the landscape and he thought it was some kind of two-way process. When asked about that with the cows, he says he thinks it is two-way actually, because the cows do show some affection towards humans as well. And the fact that he was helping her calve kind of allowed this closeness between the two. But he's speculating that perhaps this happened because he says, I was handling her calf and smelt like her calf that she was bonding to. And therefore, she allowed him to walk alongside her and give her a nudge and so on. But what's really interesting is in the last sentence, he does acknowledge that we can't actually know how the cows are thinking. So he says, I think they do get fond of you, but I'm willing to accept that that's just me being anthropomorphic. So I find it very interesting that he's aware of anthropomorphism, and yeah, he's clearly aware of kind of some of these debates within both like natural and social sciences. So the next example of the affective attachments is the shepherd's friendship with her sheep. She describes how she knows all the sheep individually because she hand-reared and bottle-fed the orphan lambs during the COVID-19 lockdown, and therefore they became tame or friendly, as she describes. And she says how she loves spending time with her flock, saying, I sometimes come in here with a beer and just hang out with them. So I really like this because it sounds a lot like commensality, because the sheep are basically grazing and she's drinking a beer, but they're sharing the same space. So there's definitely a closeness happening here. She does also say that some are more friendly or tame than others, but overall they're all happy to see her from her perspective. So we also have the enjoyment of feeding cows. And this is evidence to show that differences in attachments are due to the type of farmer, that is commercial or hobby, or the status role of the animals within the production system, that is breeding or finishing. So this is something that Wilkie argued in 2005. And I feel like this supports this because the farmers that I was having conversation with here are actually hobby farmers. So that they don't do it as their main profession, they're doing it as a hobby. And therefore they have a much smaller herd of cattle than many commercial farmers. So I really like this extract. It's very evocative, and they're describing the sensory nature of feeding cattle, how all the senses are involved, you know, smell, touch, vision, hearing. And one of them even says there's an emotional exchange between them and you. And this is because he thinks the cattle are basically distracted by the food, and that actually enables the closeness to happen, because therefore the farmers can get close to them and they can start petting them. But it's also interesting how they have their own tradition of going to see them at midnight on Christmas Eve. And from this description here about it being magical, watching them in the barn is very evocative and really shows that these farmers are enjoying the company of their animals. They enjoy watching them eat, but it's also because they think the cows are enjoying themselves as well. And we also have effective attachments to show animals, so animals that are taken to shows. So at the top there, I'm participating in Mid Devon show, showing a calf around the ring. And then the photo below that was taken by one of my interlocutors, which is one of her sheep who won lots of prizes. So I had a conversation with two beef farmers at the show, and they're describing how they really enjoy the teamwork that they think is happening when they're taking the animal around the ring, and they think that the animal will trust them. Also, there's this sense of mindfulness happening when they're in the ring with the animal, and they express a lot of pride and joy that the animal is responding well to them. So this is very reminiscent of Donna Haraway's work of becoming with an animal. So I'll just continue to talk a little bit about animal feeding. So during the spring, when calving and lambing happens, sometimes there are emergencies such as an orphan lamb, or like the ewe not accepting her lamb for whatever reason. And this can mean that the young stock need to be bottle fed, which of course is a very intimate encounter and can create these affective attachments between humans and animals. However, I do want to note that these attachments or connections, as my interlocutors described, do vary because some are more attached and some are more detached. So not all farmers were positive about human-animal attachment. This is a conversation from another farmer on a larger farm, and she's describing how craving attachments to animals is very human, but actually she thinks animals don't love us back. So it's quite direct contrast to what the traveller was saying earlier about this two-way process of love and affection with the cow that he helped to carve. But she's very adamant they don't love us back. And she's describing how, you know, you have to be quite pragmatic as a livestock farmer, because you might get attached to a bottle-fed lamb, but it will eventually die, but they need to die at the right time. So the conversation also supports the evidence that differences in attachments are due to the type of farmer and the status or role of the animals. So this same farmer describes how she's more upset about cows being killed than other animals. This is because they're breeding animals. They will stay with her for a longer time, and she's built a bond with them over the years. But also she's more upset about a cow being cold due to illness than it being slaughtered, because it's basically death in the wrong place. She's describing how it's actually very normal to get attached to animals, but really we should remember that they don't really care about us. She thinks they just care about the service we're providing them. So she gives an example here about a cow getting a scratch, and she says what they care about is being scratched. It's not how they get that scratch. So to me, this is quite a sort of naturalistic or biological way of looking at human-animal relations, which is quite different to some of the other perspectives. So the same farmer explains how attachment can lead to self-reflection on the impact of one's job on one's well-being. So she says you do have to check in with yourself and go, am I okay with this? Is this the industry for me? But for her, the most important thing is giving the animal the best possible life. And if there is a sick animal, you have to think of the bigger goal and the longer term picture. So this reveals how human-animal attachments can be imbalanced because caring for the collective is prioritized over caring for the individual animal. So, in conclusion, human-animal friendship, closeness, and attachment can make livestock slaughter more difficult, whether that's actually slaughtering or culling because of an illness. However, farmers do take a lot of pride in what they do, caring for the animals, but also the pride and the sense of duty they have for basically being a steward of the environment. And these positive feelings seem to outweigh the negative feelings they have when the animals are slaughtered. But human livestock relations are complex, and feeding and caring can be effective, creating both attachments and detachments. So as you saw in those examples, some people the effect is evident in the really positive feelings they're having. And with another farmer, it was more like a pragmatic approach, but sometimes she would get frustrated as well in the fact that some animals were ill and so on. So why look at regenerative agriculture, or regen ag as it's commonly called? So I think it's a useful lens for looking into these human-animal relations on farms. And this is because regenerative farmers do have different practices to conventional farmers, and they have this goal to farm in harmony with nature, which I think is a very interesting term, and there's lots to unpack there. But if you think that nature is basically everything, then farm animals are part of that nature, and therefore I think it's a very important and useful area of research.